So picture this. You're at a family dinner. Your kid is maybe 3 years old, and your uncle leans over and says, "You got that 529 plan set up yet?" And you just freeze, because honestly, you have no idea what he's talking about. You mumble something about looking into it, but inside you're thinking, is this something I should have done already? Am I already behind? What even is a 529? And then you go home, you Google it for like 10 minutes, get overwhelmed by terms like qualified education expenses and tax-advantaged growth, and you think, I'll figure this out later. Except later never comes. And now your kid is 7 or 10 or, God forbid, 15, and you've got maybe a few $1,000s sitting in a regular savings account earning basically nothing, watching college costs climb higher every single year. If that's you, you're not alone, and that's exactly what we're fixing today. My name is John, and I spend way too much time thinking about how people are accidentally sabotaging their kids' financial futures with outdated advice and half-understood saving strategies. If you're someone who knows you should be saving for your kid's education, but you're paralyzed by all the options, or you started a 529 plan because someone told you to, but you don't actually understand if it's the right move for your specific situation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Here's the thing that nobody tells you. The 529 plan has become this default answer that gets thrown around at every parent like it's the only option. Your coworker has one, your neighbor has one, that personal finance blog you read says you must have one. And look, 529 plans can be absolutely incredible tools, but they're not perfect for everyone. And blindly following what everyone else does is exactly how you end up with money trapped in the wrong vehicle for your specific family situation. So today, we're going to break down 529 plans versus the alternatives, and I mean really break them down. Not just the surface-level stuff you can find in 5 minutes on Investopedia, but the psychological traps, the mathematical realities, and the scenarios where a 529 might actually be the wrong choice. Because here's what most people don't realize. The right education savings strategy isn't about picking the account with the best tax benefits. It's about understanding your family's specific situation and building a plan that actually works when your kid turns 18. Let's start with what a 529 actually is, because I guarantee half the people who have these accounts don't fully understand what they signed up for. A 529 plan is basically a tax-advantaged investment account, specifically designed for education expenses. You put money in after tax, meaning you already paid income tax on that money, but then it grows completely tax-free. And when you pull it out for qualified education expenses, you don't pay taxes on the gains. In some states, you even get a state income tax deduction for contributions. Sounds pretty great, right? And it is. But here's where it gets interesting. The average cost of a 4-year public university right now is about $104,000 total. For a private university, we're looking at around $223,000. Now, if your kid is born today and college costs keep rising at the historical rate of about 6% per year, by the time they're 18, that public school education is going to cost roughly $296,000. That private school? Try $635,000. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. So the mathematical argument for a 529 is pretty straightforward. If you start putting away $300 a month from the day your kid is born, investing in a diversified portfolio averaging around 8% annual returns, you'd have approximately $150,000 by the time they hit 18. That's enough to cover a decent chunk of a public university or make a serious dent in a private one. And all those gains, we're talking roughly $85,000 in investment growth, are completely tax-free when used for education. If that same money was in a regular taxable brokerage account, you'd potentially owe capital gains taxes on that $85,000. At a 15% long-term capital gains rate, that's $12,750 that just evaporates. So the 529 just saved you nearly 13 grand. That's real money. Now, you might be thinking, okay, John, this sounds like a no-brainer. Why wouldn't anyone not use a 529? And that's exactly the question we need to dig into, because this is where most financial advice falls completely flat. Here's the thing about 529 plans that creates this massive psychological trap. They're restrictive, very restrictive. That money is earmarked for education. If your kid doesn't go to college or gets a full scholarship or decides to become a plumber and makes great money in the trades, you've got a problem.
Can you take the money out for non-education purposes? Sure, but you're going to pay income tax on the gains plus a 10% penalty. So that $85,000 in growth we talked about, you'd pay your marginal tax rate, let's say 24%, plus another 10%. That's 34% of your gains gone. You're losing nearly $29,000 to taxes and penalties. Now, there are ways around this. You can change the beneficiary to another kid or a grandkid, or even yourself if you want to go back to school. You can use it for trade schools, apprenticeships, even certain K-12 expenses up to $10,000 per year. The rules have gotten more flexible, but the core issue remains. This money is locked into education in a way that a regular investment account is not. And here's the psychological shift that nobody talks about. When you put money into a 529, you are making a bet on a future that is 18 years away. You are betting that your kid will need this money for education. You're betting that you won't need this money for something else more urgent. You're betting that the rules won't change in ways that hurt you. Look, I'm not saying don't make that bet, but I am saying that you need to understand what you're betting on. Let me tell you a story. I know a couple, we'll call them Mike and Sarah, who did everything right. They started a 529 when their daughter was 2. They contributed religiously. By the time she was 17, they had about $180,000 saved up. Their daughter got into a great state school, but she also got into her dream school, a private university, and received a scholarship that covered 60% of tuition. The remaining costs at the private school were actually comparable to the state school after the scholarship. Great news, right? Except here's what happened. That same year, Mike lost his job. Their emergency fund got depleted. They had to tap into retirement accounts early, and they had $180,000 sitting in a 529 that they couldn't touch without massive penalties, even though they were facing potential foreclosure on their house. They ended up taking out a home equity line of credit at 7% interest to cover their expenses while Mike found new work, all while having 6 figures sitting in an account they couldn't access. The mental anguish of having money that's simultaneously there and not there, it nearly destroyed them. Now that's an extreme example, but it illustrates the fundamental tension with 529 plans, liquidity versus tax optimization. Here's what most people don't realize. For a lot of families, especially those who are still building their financial foundation, liquidity is more valuable than tax optimization. So let's talk about the alternatives, because this is where it gets really interesting. This is the one that blows people's minds when they first hear about it. You can use a Roth IRA as an education savings vehicle, and in many situations, it's actually better than a 529. Here's how it works. You contribute to a Roth IRA, currently up to $7,000 per year if you're under 50. The money grows tax-free, just like a 529, but here's the key difference. You can withdraw your contributions at any time for any reason without taxes or penalties. Just the contributions, not the gains. So if you contributed $7,000 per year for 18 years, that's $126,000 in contributions that you can pull out whenever you want, for whatever you want. If your kid needs it for college, great. If they don't, you just boosted your retirement savings. If you need it for an emergency before they're 18, it's there. Now, the gains are a bit trickier. Normally, you can't touch the gains until you're 59 and a half. But, and this is huge, there's an exception for qualified education expenses. You can withdraw the gains penalty-free for education costs. You'll still pay income tax on the gains, unlike a 529, but you avoid the 10% early withdrawal penalty. Let's run the math. Same scenario, $300 per month for 18 years at 8% returns. You'd have about $150,000 total. $64,800 in contributions and $82,200 in gains. For college, you can take out all $64,800 in contributions, tax and penalty-free. Then you can take out the $82,200 in gains penalty-free, but you'll pay income tax on it. If you're in the 24% bracket, that's $20,448 in taxes. Compare that to the 529, zero taxes. So the 529 saved you about $20,000. But here's the trade-off. If your kid doesn't need all that money or gets scholarships or you need it for emergencies, the Roth gives you complete flexibility. The 529 doesn't. Which is more valuable to you, the tax savings or the flexibility? For a lot of families, especially those without a solid emergency fund or those who are behind on retirement savings, the Roth IRA is actually the better first move. Max out your Roth and then consider a 529 if you have additional money to save.
These are custodial brokerage accounts, where the money legally belongs to the child, but you manage it until they reach the age of majority, usually 18 or 21, depending on your state. The advantage? Complete flexibility. You can invest however you want, and the money can be used for anything that benefits the child. Education, sure, but also a car, a wedding, a down payment on a house, starting a business, whatever. The disadvantages: first, the money legally becomes theirs when they hit adulthood. If your 18-year-old decides to blow it all on a Tesla and a trip to Vegas, that's their legal right. You can't stop them. That makes a lot of parents uncomfortable, and rightfully so. Second, the tax treatment isn't great. The first $1,300 of unearned income, like investment gains, is tax-free. The next $1,300 is taxed at the child's rate, usually low, but anything above that is taxed at the parent's rate. Plus, custodial accounts count heavily against financial aid eligibility. About 20% of the account value is expected to go toward college costs each year, compared to only 5.64% for parent-owned 529 plans. So UTMAs give you flexibility, but create financial aid headaches and require trusting your teenager with potentially a lot of money. This is the option nobody talks about because it seems so boring. Just invest in a regular brokerage account in your name. You'll pay capital gains taxes, sure, but you maintain complete control. The money can be used for anything. It doesn't count as the student's asset for financial aid purposes, and if you're strategic about harvesting losses and holding investments long-term, the tax hit might not be as bad as you think. Plus, here's something fascinating. If you're in the 12% tax bracket or lower, your long-term capital gains rate is actually 0%. That's right, 0. So for middle-income families who manage their taxable income carefully, a regular brokerage account might not have any tax disadvantage at all compared to a 529. Here's the option that sounds crazy but might actually be the smartest for some families. Don't save specifically for college at all. Focus on building wealth, eliminating debt, and increasing your income. Then cash flow college when the time comes. Now, before you think I've lost my mind, hear me out. If you've got high-interest debt, credit cards at 20%, student loans at 7%, every dollar you put into a 529 earning 8% while carrying 20% debt is costing you 12% in opportunity cost. You're losing money to save money. That's insane. Same thing with retirement. If your employer offers a 401k match and you're not maxing it out, but you're putting money into a 529, you're leaving free money on the table. A 100% match is a 100% instant return. Your 529 isn't beating that. So the mathematically optimal strategy for many families is pay off high-interest debt, build a solid emergency fund, max out retirement accounts, especially those with employer matches, then consider education savings. And for some families, by the time you get through steps 1 through 3, you might be in a position where you can just pay for college out of current income, or your income is grown enough that you qualify for minimal financial aid anyway, or you've built enough wealth that taking out some loans isn't a crisis. I know a family that followed this path.
Instead of putting $300 a month into a 529, they threw every extra dollar at their mortgage and paid it off in 10 years. By the time their kids hit college age, they had no house payment and were able to cash flow $40,000 per year for college without breaking a sweat. Could they have saved more with the 529 tax benefits? Maybe, but they slept better at night being debt-free, and that has value too. Now here's what I actually recommend for most families, and this is where we bring it all together, a hybrid approach. Here's the strategy. First, make sure you have a solid financial foundation. That means at least $1,000 starter emergency fund, no high-interest consumer debt, getting any employer 401k match. Second, start contributing to a Roth IRA. If you're married, max out both Roth IRAs if possible. That's $14,000 per year that grows tax-free and gives you flexibility. Third, once you're maxing Roth IRAs and you have additional funds to save, then start a 529 plan. But, and this is important, don't go crazy. Start with maybe $100 to $200 per month. You're not trying to save every penny of college costs. You're trying to save enough to take the edge off while maintaining flexibility. Fourth, as your income grows and you get more financial stability, you can increase 529 contributions, but always keep that emergency fund robust and keep progressing on other financial goals. This approach gives you the best of everything: tax advantages from both the Roth and the 529, flexibility from the Roth, education-specific savings from the 529, and a balanced approach that doesn't leave you overextended. Now, one thing we haven't talked about enough is state tax deductions, and for some of you, this might completely change the calculation. Some states offer really generous tax deductions for 529 contributions. For example, New York lets you deduct up to $10,000 per year if you're married. If you're in a 6% state tax bracket, that's $600 per year in immediate tax savings just for contributing. That $600 savings on a $10,000 contribution is an instant 6% return before any investment growth. That's hard to beat. So if you live in a state with a generous 529 deduction, the math tips more heavily toward using a 529, at least up to the deduction limit. Contribute enough to max out the state tax deduction, then evaluate whether additional contributions make sense or if you should shift to other vehicles. But, and here's the catch, 7 states don't have income tax at all, so there's no state deduction to benefit from. And some states offer such small deductions that they're basically irrelevant. You've got to know your state's rules. This isn't one size fits all. Now you might be thinking, okay, John, but what about financial aid? Doesn't having money saved hurt my chances? This is where people get really confused, so let's clear it up. Yes, assets do impact financial aid, but the impact depends on whose name the assets are in. Parent-owned 529 plans count as parent assets, and only 5.64% of parent assets are expected to go toward college costs each year under the FAFSA formula. So if you have $100,000 in a parent-owned 529, only $5,640 is counted against your aid eligibility per year. Student-owned assets, like UTMA accounts, are counted at 20%, so that same $100,000 in the student's name would reduce aid by $20,000. That's a massive difference. Retirement accounts, 401ks, IRAs, aren't counted at all for financial aid purposes, 0. This is another huge advantage of the Roth IRA strategy. But here's what most people don't realize. For the vast majority of middle-class families, you're not getting need-based aid anyway. The median household income in America is about $75,000. If you're anywhere close to that or above it, you're probably not qualifying for significant need-based grants at most schools. Merit scholarships, those don't care about your assets. Your kid's GPA and test scores matter, not your bank account. So while you should be aware of financial aid implications, for most families reading this, it's not actually going to be the deciding factor. Don't let the tail wag the dog here. Here's where I'm going to get a little bit ranty because this is important. We've spent this whole video talking about how to save for college, but we haven't talked about whether the college your kid wants to attend is actually worth the cost. Look, I know this is sensitive. I know every parent wants to give their kid every opportunity, but here's the truth. Borrowing $200,000 for an undergraduate degree in most fields is financial suicide. It just is. The average student loan payment for someone with $200,000 in debt is about $2,000 per month on a standard 10-year repayment plan. For a recent graduate making $50,000 per year, which is actually pretty good, that's more than half their take-home pay going to student loans. They can't buy a house, they can't save for retirement, they're financially crippled for a decade or more. And here's the thing, the research shows that for most careers, where you go to undergrad doesn't matter nearly as much as people think. The kid who goes to a good state school and graduates debt-free is going to be in a way better financial position than the kid who goes to a prestigious private school and graduates with 6 figures in debt. There are exceptions if your kid is going into investment banking or certain fields where the network really matters, fine. But for most kids, the premium you pay for a brand-name school doesn't pay off. So part of your education planning needs to be having honest conversations with your kids about college costs and returns on investment. If you've saved $100,000 in a 529 and your kid gets into their dream school that costs $300,000, you need to have a serious conversation about whether taking on $200,000 in debt makes sense for their intended career. This is where that flexibility I keep talking about becomes really important. If you have money in a Roth IRA that could be used for college but doesn't have to be, you can make that decision when you actually have real numbers. Maybe you use some of it, maybe you don't, but you have options. If it's all locked in a 529, you feel pressure to use it all on college, even if cheaper options make more sense, because otherwise you're wasting the tax benefits. All right, let's bring this home with actual steps you can take today. Step 1, figure out where you actually are financially. Do you have consumer debt? Is your emergency fund solid? Are you getting your 401k match? Be honest with yourself. Step 2, if you're not financially stable yet, don't start a 529. Focus on debt, emergency fund, and retirement first. That's not being a bad parent, that's being smart. You can't help your kid if you're financially drowning. Step 3, if you are financially stable, research your state's 529 plan and the tax benefits. Figure out if there's a state deduction and how much. Step 4, consider opening a Roth IRA if you haven't already. Even if you plan to do a 529 eventually, the Roth should probably come first for most people. Step 5, if you decide on a 529, start small. Don't feel like you need to save every penny of projected college costs. Aim for maybe a third to half of expected costs and plan to cash flow the rest or use a mix of savings, current income, and modest loans. Step 6, set up automatic monthly contributions. Whether it's $50 or $500, automate it so it happens without you thinking about it. Step 7, revisit your strategy every couple of years. As your income changes, as your kids get older, as you get more information about their likely path, adjust accordingly. Look, here's the bottom line. Your kid's education is important, but it's not more important than your own financial stability. The absolute worst thing you can do is sacrifice your retirement to pay for college, because your kid can borrow for school, but you can't borrow for retirement. The best thing you can do for your kids financially is to model good money habits, make strategic decisions, and be intentional about your goals. Whether that means maxing out a 529, using a Roth IRA, or some hybrid approach, the right answer is the one that fits your specific situation. And if you're sitting here thinking, man, I should have started this years ago, stop that right now. The best time to start was when your kid was born. The second best time is today. Even if your kid is 15 and you're just now getting serious about this, 3 years of consistent saving and smart strategy is better than nothing. You can still make a dent. So figure out your plan, set up your accounts,
Automate your contributions, and then go be present with your kids. Because here's what I've learned spending way too much time thinking about this stuff. Your kids don't actually need you to pay for 100% of their college education. They need you to teach them how to make smart financial decisions, how to think long-term, and how to build a life that isn't crushed by debt. Everything else is just details. If this video helped you think through your education saving strategy, smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment letting me know what approach you're taking and why. I read every single comment, and I learn from you guys just as much as I learn from you. Now get out there and make some smart decisions for your family. I'll see you in the next one.